My first question for you, so just tell me a little bit about your background and why you believe you're the best candidate to represent us in Congress.
Yeah, well, thank you for that question. I certainly didn't go looking for a political career, but Illinoisans and Americans are ready for some change and some representatives that have real world experience, have some common sense. They just want to take to Washington and advocate for them. I have worked as a science educator. I have owned my own small business in Decatur, and I've also been working for low income families in my community. And I think that those career positions and those volunteer roles have really prepared me to be able to find success for all in the Illinois 13th. I've really enjoyed traveling the district. We have some great large communities, urban communities, we have some small rural communities as well, and I really find that we have so much more in common than we do apart. I know this country is very polarized and very divided, but I'm ready to bring about some community spirit and bringing people together and knowing that I'm going to go to Washington and work for them.
And one thing that Americans do tend to agree on is one of the biggest issues here in this country right now: inflation, high prices at the gas stations, at the grocery store. So what would your plan be to help that?
Well, you're absolutely right. Every voter that I've talked to in the district is feeling the pinch in their own pocketbooks and their own household budgets, whether that's gas and groceries or record high utility rates here in Illinois. And they want to know that their representative is going to stop the spending. You know, this administration and my opponent who worked for Joe Biden in his Office of Management and Budget has really driven the economy up and inflation to record high prices by just continuing the reckless spending. So one of my first top priorities is going to be reining in that spending, making sure that we're supporting pro-growth tax policies and letting Americans keep more of what they've earned. You know, we've got energy independence. That's been a big discussion, driving up those gas prices, and really knowing that if we're going to talk about lowering the prices and then shoring up this national security of America as well, we really need to focus on American energy independence.
And then, do you support the president's inflation reduction plan, or would you like to see a different approach?
Well, as it was drafted, I don't know that I would have been a voter for the Inflation Reduction Act. You know, Nikki Budzinski and Joe Biden didn't listen to bipartisan economic experts that talked about how the Inflation Reduction Act was not actually going to reduce inflation. So I do think there were good parts of the bill and good pieces of legislation that we could have talked about separately, but I don't think that the Inflation Reduction Act is what we needed.
And there have been multiple lawsuits filed over President Biden's student loan forgiveness plan, people saying that it's kind of a short-term fix for a longer-term problem. Do you agree with that? And what kind of solution would you like to see for the student loan crisis that we're facing?
Well, you're absolutely right. We are having a crisis, and there are many that are struggling to pay their student debt loan payments. And the Biden administration just seemed like a gimmick. He'd been talking about it since he was a candidate for president. And of course, now as we near this election time and the midterms, it seemed like a short-term solution, as you mentioned. I don't think it's going to do anything to decrease the sky-high prices for higher education. And I feel like it was an insult to many who have either chosen not to take out a college loan because they couldn't afford it, or those that have worked really hard to pay off their student loans. So I think we need to have a conversation that's talking about ways that we might be able to reduce the interest on student loans, or have hard conversations with higher education to maybe freeze tuition. And then of course we need to talk about alternatives to higher ed. We have a workforce shortage across almost every industry that I have been speaking with, businesses all across the Illinois 13, and we need to talk about how we can get to students to get them into certification programs and training programs so that we can build a very skilled workforce as well.
And then just switching gears now, we've seen with the Supreme Court decision with Roe v. Wade that this is kind of changing the landscape of the country. Certain states now have legalized abortion while others do not have abortion legal. So do you believe that there should be a federal legalization of abortion or a federal ban of abortion, or would you want to keep that up to each individual state?
Well, I applauded the overturning of the Roe v. Wade decision because it returned it to the states. I do believe that being a legislative issue closer to the people, you know, we elected our state representatives here, and it's a very personal issue for me, having been adopted, and I want to be able to continue to advocate for pro-life outcomes, you know, supporting women and children, but I definitely believe that it belongs at the state's issue, and I have been on record saying that I would not support a national ban. But my opponent is calling me the extremist here as far as being a pro-life candidate, and we do live here in Illinois, and we have very extreme positions at the state legislature. I am not for late-term abortion, and I'm definitely not for taxpayer-funded abortion, especially in a post-Roe world.
And then what would you do to fight the high crime that we're seeing across the nation and even here in central Illinois? Do you support any kind of assault weapon ban, any kind of gun control, or do you believe there's another option to fix this?
Well, the skyrocketing crime is very heartbreaking. Right here throughout the 13th district, we have seen incidents of violent crime rising in our small communities. And we definitely need to make sure that at the national level, we are talking about a pro-law enforcement and anti-criminal, rhetoric. I think that we need to be able to have common sense conversations about keeping guns out of the hands of those that should not have access to them. So I applaud bipartisan efforts at the national level to have some of those conversations. But I've been doing ride-alongs with sheriffs and police departments. They're very concerned currently with Illinois Safety Act, which is opposed just about by every law enforcement agency in the state, as well as state's attorneys. So I do hope that there will be some reform to the Safety Act that has passed, and that they will continue to have the right people at the table talking about what those changes need to be.
And then right now, how much do you think that the United States should support the war over in Ukraine? Because, some say we need to kind of take care of our own area first, but as we've seen the ripple effects happening all throughout the world with these rising energy prices. So do you believe we should be investing more into Ukraine, or how should we handle that situation?
Well, I know that Americans are very sympathetic to the humanitarian crisis in Ukraine, and we want to make sure that we're supporting the people there and we're pushing back against Putin, who feels the ability to go and put the press on. Obviously, we would like diplomatic solutions, and so we have spent a number of taxpayer dollars supporting Ukraine. I think that people have concerns about the endless spending over in Ukraine, and we want to be able to make sure that we are taking care of our own here first. We have our very own border to secure as a priority, and we have homeless living on our streets, and we have people facing food insecurity. So I think most Americans would prefer that we take a hard look at where our dollars are being spent and making sure that we're putting Americans first as well.
Yeah, and then do you think this war highlighted the need for America to find their own way to get energy? Is that something that you believe in?
Absolutely. I mean, anytime we have global crises that are then affecting, gas and oil prices, supply chain issues, we want to make sure that we are thinking long term and making sure that America can bring our supply chain home. We can rely on our natural resources right here in America. And I think some of the short-term solutions coming out of the Biden administration, it's terrifying to me that we're drawing down our strategic oil reserves. It's supposed to be for an emergency situation and not just because we want to be able to provide a little relief at the pump. Gas prices are well up over where they were 2 years ago when this administration took office. So it has been a conversation that needs to continue to be had, and we need to definitely focus on American energy independence.
And then just my last question. We spoke about earlier all these rising prices, but something we've really seen is healthcare costs going up. Mm-hmm. So kind of what would your plan be to bring those down, especially insulin, price at the pharmacy? It's just unattainable for some Americans.
You're right. Prices of everything are going up, and Americans are having to make some really hard choices. And prescription drugs are often a very high expense for people. I've worked in a nonprofit where we do provide private dollars to be able to offer some relief to those co-pays, and so that, for example, seniors on a limited income don't have to make those tough decisions between groceries in their pantry and prescription medicines. So I do know that we have had conversations about a piece of legislation in the Inflation Reduction Act, which is going to cap some prescription drug prices. So I think those kinds of conversations need to continue to happen at the national level so that we can provide additional relief to Americans.
Yeah, and if you were elected to Congress, would you be willing, to work with the other side, since we've seen so much polarization lately?
Yes, I refuse to believe bipartisanship is dead. We know that Americans are hurting, and they want representatives that are going to go to Washington and work for them. They're going to find compromise. They're going to work towards progress. We're going to have those hard conversations. And, Illinois is my home. I want to know that, when we're having those conversations in Illinois, I want voters to know that I'm advocating for them. I've spent the last 9 months, 10 months traveling the district, being a good listener, listening to concerns all across this district, and I have a heart for going to Washington and making sure that we bring those needs and those values to Washington, as opposed to my opponent who has come back here from Washington, D.C., and I feel like really wants to bring those priorities here to us, and that's just not something that we can afford at this point.
All right, well, is there anything else you want to say?
Well, thank you so much, Nicole. I think that voters have a definite choice on the ballot, and I want them to know that I'm going to continue to work for them, that I am a political outsider that has gotten into this race because I do want to see progress. And so I look forward to earning their vote on November 8th.
All right.